years and a terminal diagnosis to finally confront those fears and become the man he is today. Here's Zach.
I'll never forget the first time I drank an entire 40 of malt liquor by myself at a party and got in a fight that night, talked to the girl that I was crushing on, older girl, felt confident walking around this Maricosta party, which was like a rival high school. I remember coming home and thinking like I've found myself. I remember thinking that with alcohol, I had discovered who I really was and who I could really be. Like my potential hadn't been met until I found alcohol.
From that time forward, Zach dedicated himself to alcohol. He drank religiously from the time he was 15 until he was 23, at which point his addiction deepened and he was drinking 24 hours a day, every single day.
I think a lot of my alcoholism is rooted in the idea that I didn't want to spend time with myself. I just didn't want to spend any time with me. I wanted to spend time with the person who was intoxicated, who was messed up enough to forget what it was like to be in my skin. And that's what I pursued at all times, was just to be able to be intoxicated enough to forget who I was. The bottom line is I was ashamed of the person I was when I was intoxicated, and I was even more ashamed of the person I was when I wasn't. And then at 28, right around the beginning of the year of 2008, I started to get sick and I started to turn colors, started to get yellow. My stomach started to swell up. My eyes were yellow. I started to have mental issues, ammonia buildup on my brain. That was the beginning of liver failure.
Zach continued to get worse, and he continued to drink, until one night, he hit a breaking point.
I remember locking eyes with myself and kind of leaning into the mirror and not recognizing at all who I was. Not my body, not my face, not my eyes. I was completely yellow with this 9 months pregnant belly full of varicose veins, like feeding this herniated belly button, and terribly skinny. What wasn't yellow on me was purple, bruises all over my whole body. I looked dead. I looked like a ghost. And I just started to weep. It was at that moment I looked behind me, and all my 3 dogs were sitting there looking up at me like I was the sexiest man alive. They saw who I was. They saw that Dad was in there. I just remember sitting kind of in the corner next to the toilet with all of them under my arms, just weeping uncontrollably, committing myself to them, just saying that, well, if I can't do this for myself, I'm going to make a strong effort for you guys. And whatever happens, at least we'll give it a shot. At least this will actually be me doing it, and I'm going to step up to the plate and take some swings. And if we fail, we fail, but at least we would have given it a shot. That night, we didn't really go back to sleep, but I got up with the sun and we sat out on the deck and journaled, and we went on our first walk. And that first walk, I didn't get very far because I could barely walk, but that was the beginning of kind of the rest of my life and the beginning of my commitment to rescuing dogs and then people and all of the rest of it. It all started with just that little move, that little commitment of I'm going to try. If I can't do it for myself, I'll do it for them. Really what it was I just needed to be in service. I was stuck in my own head, worried about myself, constantly focused on selfish things that I wasn't getting anywhere. I had to put my fear and my anxiety aside and put myself into service.
And he did. Zach began to live his life in service of his dogs, of all dogs. He'd found a purpose greater than himself.
I'm coming up on 11 years sober by the grace of dog and the grace of God. And once my brain plugged itself into its purpose and all of my actions followed, everything I did from the time I woke up until the time I went to bed, and probably all the dreams in between, were focused on my purpose. And I'd never had that before. I'd never had any other purpose but to drink and use. And with that, I started to get better. Almost immediately, I got taken out of a state-of-the-art hospital that does liver transplant at Cedars-Sinai. I got sent home, and within a month, I got radically better. Not only did I get better, I didn't need a liver transplant within 6 months. So by the time I qualified for a liver transplant, I no longer needed one. And I looked like a different person. By the time the first of the year 2009 came around, I fundamentally looked like a different human being. The jaundice had gone away. The ascites had gone away. I was still very sick, but I was a completely different human being.
Zach had been given a second chance at life. a gift that he is now dedicated to passing on. In honor of his relationship with his dogs, Zach founded Marley's Mutt's Dog Rescue to give second chances to dogs. Now, through Marley's Mutt's Positive Change program, Zach is using shelter dogs to rehabilitate and give second chances to inmates at some of California's most secure prisons.
Our purpose is to take rescue dogs from the shelter, bring them into maximum security state prisons, and rehabilitate those dogs for 14 weeks inside of a prison setting. That's where they live, whether that be the girls' juvenile facility or North Kern State Prison. And through that process, rehabilitate the men, rehabilitate the dogs, and set those men and women on a course to true rehabilitation, true redemption, and then by the time they get out, employment. There's 2.5 million incarcerated Americans, and the vast majority of those incarcerated Americans have virtually no self-confidence and no pathway to redemption or a second chance. They are simply waiting to become failures, waiting to create victims, and waiting to become a statistic. And because I know how much potential exists in those quote unquote throwaways, it's my purpose in life to extract the potential in those throwaways and to show the world what they're capable of. I think people don't realize that the next Oprah, the next Tony Robbins, they may very well come from the correctional system. They might be sitting in a prison right now waiting to get out and don't know where their life is headed. But if we simply give them some belief and some direction, magical things can happen.
And magical things are happening.
Of the 25 people that have been released from prison who participated in our program, 0 of them have gone back to prison, and fully half of them are employed in the pet services industry.
So how exactly does Zach do it?
Just for the record, I want to reiterate that I've never served time in prison and I don't know what it is to be an inmate, but some of the observations that I've had while working in there are really marvelous to behold. Prison is not a place of emotional exchange. And if you were to be vulnerable, it's simply being weak. And if you are weak in prison, you're setting yourself up for a world of pain, where however long you're down for, if you've been marked as somebody who's weak, you're going to have a lot of trouble and your life may even be on the line. For us, our entire program is based on emotional exchanges and emotional availability and maturity. So we have to be able to crack that code. And it really just starts with me and some of the other trainers being vulnerable ourselves. So, my first responsibility whenever we open a program is to go in there and tell my story and be vulnerable about what I'm feeling and to give and receive respect with them and to provide a place of trust. The very first thing that happens with them is they start to play peekaboo with their emotions. They start to identify that they're feeling certain things. And they do so sometimes at